We always get common sense from my next guest on every school issue. Chris McGovern joins us, chairman of the Campaign for Real Education and indeed a former head teacher himself. Very good morning to you.
Good morning, Julia.
Thank you so much for joining us. Now, genuinely, I couldn't call which way you're going to go on this story, actually. I'm intrigued to know. But with hundreds of thousands more children are going to get free school meals and an announcement from the Bridget what is that? That's awful, I've forgotten. But Phillipson, I was thinking Nicholson. No, it's not Nicholson. Bridget Phillipson, the Education Secretary, basically looking at an extra 500 quid's worth of free school meals at lunchtime, loads of free school meals when it comes to breakfast already, handed out to more parents if they are claiming universal credit. So not just the kids on the very lowest incomes, but indeed children whose parents' incomes reach over £40,000. You can still get universal credit, would be eligible for this. She says this will be helping children to learn. It's better for teachers, better for kids, better for the other kids as well, because these kids are able to learn, and it will help those parents on low income. So is this a good idea and a good use of public money, Chris?
Well, first of all, they're not free. Of course, the taxpayer's paying for these meals.
£1 billion over 3 years.
Yeah, I must say that when I took over an educational charity, we took over a failing school in a poor area, and one of the first things we did was to provide the children with a breakfast because the children were hungry. But yes, I welcome the fact that children will not go hungry. Of course, every sensible person should. But we have to ask the question, are we here dealing with just the symptoms of a problem? What's the cause of the fact that so many children are coming to school hungry? And then we have to look at what's going on in parents' homes. When I took over this failing school, we had some parents, I have to say, were feckless, and they were fighting at the school gate, were on drugs, and were unemployable. But there are other parents, working class parents, you might say, but who didn't necessarily have jobs, but who desperately wanted to help their children. Yeah. But they themselves had been through our education system. They themselves were semi-literate, semi-numerous. They couldn't help their children, even if they wanted to. But they're not going to come on your show and say, look, I can't read and write. Yeah. So we're actually probably... we would be better. Well, yes, we've got to feed children, of course, but we've got to give parents the ability to get a job so they're employable, so they can then feed their own children, because that ultimately the state cannot become the parent.
And this is the concern. And I think everyone listening and watching will say, yeah, of course we don't want any child going hungry, whatever the reason why their parents, whether they're using the money on fags or booze, or they just literally can't cope with their finances at all. No one wants a child to go hungry. We know how vital a healthy meal is, whether it's breakfast or lunch, for the school day, for them actually being able to learn. And there is a benefit to everyone else's child, because you haven't got a kid who's being disruptive and holding the class back. And you'll understand that more as someone who's been in the classroom directly dealing with that. But again, this is where so many of us do share concerns. A lot of our audience are saying this, and certainly my guest, Philip Ingram, as well, that we are just taking over so many of the jobs of parents. Where does it end? There's no parent in this country who can't afford to give their kid a breakfast. And I'm not talking about a full fry up. I mean, who gives their kid that? A bit of cereal with some milk and or a slice of toast. No kid needs to go to school hungry because of finances in this country. I simply don't accept that. But lunch is a little bit more expensive. We're looking at an average price of £2.65 a day. It's about 500 quid a year. That is a big chunk out of a lot of parents' salaries. But are we really saying a lot of those parents couldn't afford it if they were required to pay for it? What about taking that 500 out of their benefits and giving it directly to the school to pay for the education? Wouldn't that be a better solution?
It's true, and most parents, let's be honest, will put their children first, but not all parents will. Some parents can be quite feckless. Look, if you look around the world, and we shouldn't confine this to Britain, we see countries which are far poorer than Britain, parents earning far less, and yet they are investing in their children's education in a big way by supporting them at home. Yeah. Countries such as Vietnam, which is we would classify in the old language as a third world country, even large parts of China, the parents are heavily involved in their education, and those countries are now outperforming the UK. Yeah. So you're right to say the parents' position is absolutely crucial. We depend far too much on the state. Parents have to be made more responsible. If I were Secretary of State, yes, I would make sure children are fed, but I would also make sure that parents who haven't been educated well by the state system can go back to school or to college and learn how to read and write. That would be a way out of it. So it's no good just dealing with the symptom. Yeah. You have to deal with the underlying cause. Why are parents so dependent on the state? That's an illness in our society. We've got to get over it. And we don't have a choice in this, Julia. because the rest of the world, particularly in the Asia Pacific, they're outperforming us. It's not a choice. We have to help parents to help themselves.
And we've got there's so little excuse for this. Again, actually, an awful lot of immigrant parents. I mean, one of the reasons why, for instance, London, the capital city's education results have gone up in recent years. It's not just some of those reforms from Michael Gove and others. It's actually they went up until lockdown, obviously. Was actually a lot of immigrant kids with parents, particularly Indian and Chinese parents, where family and education are the two biggest values, and they're pushing those kids. Some of these kids of parents who don't even speak the language themselves, but absolutely understanding that this is what their kids need to get ahead in their new country. I mean, all in favour of that, are we not? But this is the thing. A lot of these parents, let's be honest though, there'll be the people who just can't cope, things aren't going well, but there'll be also parents who just don't really care. And they have their kids to get the extra benefit, and they spend it on the fags and the drugs and the booze. Those parents exist. I know those parents exist. For some bizarre reason, politicians largely don't seem to think those parents exist. But every teacher I've spoken to will deal with that. I've got a friend who's a head of a inner city school, and he has, a lot of parents like that. What do we do about them? Should we be leaving a child in a home where no one bothers to feed them?
Well, yes. I mean, first of all, you're absolutely right about the parents of immigrant children. Immigrants are a success story. Too often, the problem of immigration is seen as only a problem. But actually, just as the Irish or the Italians or the Poles went to America in the 19th century and built that country, so the immigrants in this country are a success story. Children work very hard. The parents push them. It is the white working class who are underperforming. How do you resolve that? Well, it's with great difficulty, because those white working class are themselves products of an underperforming education system. So I come back to this point. You have to help the parents, give them the skills to help their children. Bridget Phillipson, idealistic, yes, good to feed children, of course, but deal with the problem and look at why it is in other countries, parents who have no money or very little money can achieve so highly. And they achieve so highly because they, like our immigrant population, they support their children and will do anything for their children. We have to change the mindset, and it's difficult, but we've got to do something about helping parents to help themselves.
You're right. We always seem to deal with the symptoms. We always think, if in doubt, throw more money at the problem. Well, Tony Blair and Gordon Brown did that for a decade. I'm not sure it worked out very well for anybody. Really good to talk to you, as always. Chris McGovern, Chairman of the Campaign for Real Education.